Good afternoon, members of the media, wider viewing and listening public of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all very much for being so responsive at such short notice and attending this afternoon's media conference and also tuning in and listening in. Let me start by offering my sincerest best wishes to all of our citizens of Trinidad and Tobago for 2021 as we start a new year, and really for the globe as we continue to face unprecedented times, certainly within the last 100 years, as we face this global pandemic that continues, that is COVID-19. This afternoon I've come here to address a specific issue, and that is the obsession, or the seeming obsession, with helicopters. I'd like to just remind the population of back in 2015 when a PNM administration took over. One of the first things we faced in 2015 upon assuming office was a massive count of helicopters under the service and being paid for by the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. In addition to 4 AW139s, and these are the big helicopters that were with the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard and were part of the arsenal of tools and assets for the OPVs that were cancelled, there were 4 large offshore helicopters. These were kept by the UNC administration. So start with those 4 AW139s that were part of the helicopter fleet with the Trinidad and Tobago Air Guard in 2015 when we assumed office. And of course, those would have been performing military duties, law enforcement duties, and the likes, search and rescue duties, and going on operations intelligence. 4 very large helicopters, 4 AW139s. There were also 2 other small helicopters that at the time were assigned to the NOC that were used for surveillance, for intelligence operations, and the like, and again to support operations. So you had 6 helicopters at that point in time. What we also discovered is that there were 2, the UNC had leased additionally 2 Sikorsky S-76D helicopters. So the UNC had leased 2 additional Sikorsky S-76D helicopters. These are also fairly large helicopters akin to the AW139s. When we looked into it, we saw that there was one leased by NHSL in May 2015. And you all would be familiar with that because we had informed you all of this some time back over the last couple of years. This is the infamous helicopter that us, the taxpayers, paid for, leased in May 2015, and it never arrived in Trinidad and Tobago. So this helicopter, leased at our expenses as taxpayers, stayed in a hangar in Delaware, which has been in the news recently, but it was in a hangar in Delaware as we paid the monthly lease arrangements and lease payments for this since May 2015. The reason it couldn't come here is because it was leased by the then UNC on an as-is, where-is basis, and there was never any air certificate worthiness or any air certificates provided for it to be able to leave the United States and make its way here as a search and rescue helicopter. So that's the first major debacle. And that is what we faced. And as an administration coming in, we were faced with a massive monthly bill, massive for me anyway, of US $119,850. So a lease arrangement entered into for a helicopter that could not come to Trinidad and Tobago, never made it to Trinidad and Tobago, at a cost to us, the taxpayers, of US $119,850. So at some stage, we gave instructions that the lease should be terminated. They should not continue paying any lease arrangements for this helicopter because, of course, the taxpayers were getting absolutely no use for it. That is when we discovered, as I'll get to with respect to the second helicopter that now seems to be a focal point in our news, the type of contractual arrangements entered into. So this helicopter that was being leased by NHSL from May 2015 at a cost of $119,850 US a month He terminated that. There was then some litigation. It was being leased by a company called Milestone Aviation Group, which is now Vertical Aviation Number 1 LLC. So the former name of this company was Milestone Aviation Group, and is now known as Vertical Aviation Number 1 LLC. That matter went to litigation in the courts of the United States. We, as a state, hired an international law firm called Freshfields. They, along with the Ministry of Works and the guidance of the Office of the Attorney General, negotiated a settlement of that matter and managed to clear it off. But that was the first one for the helicopter that never made it, and a lease arrangement which was quite strange on an as-is, where-is basis. Why would anyone lease a helicopter without ensuring that it could come to Trinidad and Tobago and be of service, even if, as is our submission, it was an excess helicopter at this stage and there was no need for it in Trinidad and Tobago? For the state's purposes, as I've just outlined, we already had 4 AW139s and 2 smaller helicopters being used by the Air Guard and the NOC. Let's then move now to the helicopter that seems to be making the circles, and rightly so, by the media picking up the story. And that is the second Sikorsky S-76D helicopter. And let me just give you all the history with this one. So this one was actually leased by the then Office of the Prime Minister, and I'll set it out for you all, under the NOC, which was under the Office of the Prime Minister at the time, in late 2014. You would have seen it being suggested by a member of Parliament who was a former senior member of a then UNC government, and I believe sat on the National Security Council at the time, Dr. Rudal Munilal, that this was being leased for the people of Trinidad and Tobago and is hidden and is deteriorating out of sight in Camp Camuto. Well, I'm here today to give you all, the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the taxpayers like myself who paid for these helicopters that couldn't be used, and give you the reasons why. First of all, let me say, and let me completely debunk any suggestion that there's been any attempt to hide this particular helicopter. Certainly not under PNM administration. There's been no attempt. The helicopter could not be flown from December 2015. Mark that point in time, and we'll soon get to the limited use that this helicopter had. I personally have seen this helicopter up at Camp Camuto. The helicopter was not configured for use by our law enforcement or by our military personnel in Trinidad and Tobago. The helicopter is configured for executive use. So that's the first lie and misleading falsity that I'd like to debunk. Any suggestion by the UNC that the helicopter was to be used by our law enforcement agencies is wrong. It is completely configured for executive use. And of course, you all, the members of the media, the population looking on, would recall during the period of 2010 to 2015, rather than roadways be used by the former Prime Minister, it was the use of helicopters to fly to and from San Fernando to Port of Spain. The history of this, the background to the lease agreement. Milestone Aviation Group, which we now know is Vertical, has now become Vertical, put a proposal forward on the 12th of August 2014. And it was addressed to Garvin Hira, the then executive director of the NOC. And they sought to enter into an agreement with the NOC to lease this Sikorsky S-76D. On the 20th of August 2014, Mr. Hira signed the proposal agreeing to Milestone's terms as specified. So a proposal was put forward on the 12th of August 2014. On the 20th of August 2014, Mr. Hira, the executive director of the NOC, signed agreeing to the proposal. A note was taken to the National Security Council on the 16th of September 2014. So Hira signed a proposal agreeing on the 20th of August 2014. The National Security Council got involved via a note to the National Security Council dated the 16th of September 2014, already committed to it by an officer of the NOC. And it was on the 6th of November 2014 that the National Security Council considered the note. So it didn't even come up for consideration on the 16th of September. It was considered on the 20th of November 2014, and the then chairman of the National Security Council, who I will remind you is the Prime Minister, the then Prime Minister is Mrs. Kamala Prasad-Bissessar, confirmed the decision whereby the NSC, National Security Council, agreed to lease this Sikorsky S-76D helicopter at a monthly cost of $139,500 US. And I've just told you all and outlined to you all at that time the amount of helicopter assets that we had in law enforcement and national security in Trinidad and Tobago. 4 AW139s, we had 2 smaller ones. Nevertheless, in November 2014, the then National Security Council decided to lease and commit the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago to a cost of $139,500 US a month for a 5-year period at the then exchange rate of $6.37 TT to 1 US. That was about $888,000 just for the lease. That's not the cost of pilots. That's not the cost of running it. That's not the cost of maintenance. That's not the cost of insurance or any other cost of running a helicopter, which, as you all know, is extremely costly. So the goal of this former minister and a then government coming to ask us to answer questions, they're the ones who have to answer the taxpayers why they committed us to almost $1 million a month for an unnecessary helicopter that was configured and remains configured because it couldn't be used, as I'll come to in a short while, for executive use. What then happened is when we came in as an administration, so that took place in November 2014. When we came in as an administration and we examined these 2 contracts because of the exorbitant cost, and then what happened by December 2015, the airworthiness certificate had run out, so it could not be used anymore. There was no maintenance contract put in place beyond December 2015 for the use of this aircraft. And then when we began to look at the exorbitant cost of utilizing the aircraft, realizing that the aircraft was configured for executive use, and there was nobody in a PNM administration and government who had any use to be traveling in a helicopter at taxpayers' cost, we decided that this was not something worth pursuing and continuing to cost the taxpayers almost $1 million a month for, right? And that's just the cost of the lease arrangements, not the cost of running it. These helicopters, the NOC was transferred to the SSA in December 2015, and they took over. What then happened is the SSA, when paying these amounts, began to realize it made no sense. They sought legal advice as to the termination of these arrangements, this particular arrangement, this arrangement of almost $140,000 US in a lease payment a year for a helicopter that could not be used because there was no insurance, there was no maintenance contract executed for it. And when they looked at the cost of how much it would have cost the taxpayers, it didn't make sense to continue these arrangements. They had legal advice, they sought legal advice with respect to the contract, and this is where some glaring issues came to pass. And I can tell you all, as an attorney with significant practices and as a litigation attorney myself, when I looked at this contract and these particular clauses I'm going to tell you all about now, they are massive red flags, and I will tell you what I intend to do about it. So the additional cost as a result of leasing this particular helicopter, this is what it would have been for us, the taxpayers. An airframe maintenance cost, contract cost. For 2015, the total was $340,000 US. Engine maintenance, the annual insurance payments. The annual insurance payments for this were around $230,000 US. Then you had pilot training costs, engineer training cost. So in October 2016, the Strategic Services Agency recommended to the Ministry of National Security that negotiations in relation to the Total Assurance Program Maintenance Agreement be postponed pending a determination by the Office of the Attorney General as to whether the lease should be terminated. So after carrying this cost for almost a year and trying to determine whether there was usefulness for this aircraft, they then sought legal advice because of the exorbitant cost associated with it. The following clauses were then discovered. You would have heard our Attorney General talk about at this stage the waiver of sovereign immunity. So what happened during the period of time is the then Attorney General had advised that we could waive sovereign immunity. What that means is every government has immunity in other countries, and you can't be pursued in other countries, etc. Why is it that the UNC gave up the sovereign immunity? That's the first big red flag. This one, the second one, is an even bigger red flag for me, and I want to draw your attention to it. The proposed terms that were agreed to contained a net lease clause. Basically what this is it prevented us, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, from terminating this lease arrangement. So in other words, from the day you sign this lease arrangement for 5 years, we are then bound to pay the full cost of the lease arrangement, and you could not terminate the contract. If you terminated it 2 months later, 3 months later, you were then bound to pay the full extent of the contract. Of course, the full extent of the lease of this aircraft far exceeded the cost it would have cost to even have bought the aircraft. Worse than that, there was another part of this clause that was quite disadvantageous to us, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And what it was is that if you terminated, if you failed to pay the lease, what they, the lessor, in this case the Milestone, now Vertical, could have done is exercise something called a put option. And that meant that they could immediately call upon us, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to pay an exorbitant sum of about $16 million, regardless of how many lease payments were made. These are massive, massive red flags. And these are red flags that concern us. They now concern me as the Minister of National Security. When you're dealing with corruption and you're fighting corruption, especially when you look at contractual agreements, you always look to see what are massive disadvantageous terms. Understand a government has a lot of leverage in contractual negotiations. A government can always make demands and push and fight for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, as we're doing, for example, and as we've done in our energy contractual negotiations over the period of time. So we gave up sovereign immunity here, the UNC administration, and then they also gave up our right to terminate. And then if there was any termination, any breach of any lease payments, etc., they gave the persons the right to call upon us to pay for the full cost of the helicopter and more. And that is what then led to litigation surrounding this particular helicopter. They then took us to court, took the government of Trinidad and Tobago to court on the basis of this put option. At the time, they were claiming a sum of approximately $16.1 million US, as well as compensatory damages, pre-judgment, post-judgment, interest, cost, and the like. They took us to court in the courts of New York, rather. Again, we used Freshfields as our international law firm to represent us in this matter. The Attorney General managed to negotiate some settlement with respect to it. We ended up paying a settlement agreement of $6.5 million US at a time, and then were to return the helicopter at our own cost, meaning the cost to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So all of this time, this is what was going on with this unusable helicopter that made absolutely no sense to be utilized, because we would have had to have paid much more than was already incurred, and there was no use for this type of helicopter under the current administration. What happened is COVID then happened, and we had difficulty in being able, we did not prioritize the sums of money to get this helicopter back up to where they wanted it. I think in Canada or in the United States, as well as in the prioritization of our funds and the amount of funds over the period of time. This was not made a priority, as well as there were difficulties with borders being closed, with the global pandemic that is COVID, in terms of getting persons to do what needed to be done, in terms of coming, creating, freighting, or maybe getting the helicopter back up there during this period of time. So what that then led to is the current litigation that is ongoing. And I don't want to say much more about the current litigation because, of course, it's sub judice. And I don't want to prejudice this country's position with respect to the litigation. However, in looking at it recently as the Minister of National Security and in conference with our local lawyers from the Office of the Attorney General, as well as our international lawyers, this thought crossed my mind, and in fact has now led to the next course of action. With these type of massive red flags, and who would paint the people of Trinidad and Tobago into this type of position with these exorbitant costs to be paid for much more than the value of the asset, more than the value of the helicopter, and that lease arrangements that don't seem to be in sync, but more so what red flag for me are those contractual terms I've told you about, the waiver of sovereign immunity, as well as the bigger one for me, no ability to terminate. The very, very few contracts I've come across in my over 20 years of practice where you agree not to terminate a contract, it is always a red flag of potential corruption. It means that the persons who entered into the agreement at the time were giving away the right to terminate. You never know what's going to happen a year from now, much less 5 years from now. Why would you give up the right to terminate? I have sought advice, and I can tell the country of Trinidad and Tobago what I intend to do today is I shall be writing to the Department of Justice in the United States. One arm of the Department of Justice in the United States is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You all would all be familiar with the DOJ. In the United States, the Department of Justice, which is a very serious organization. I intend to write to the Department of Justice as a representative of you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to ask them to commence a criminal investigation into the procurement of this contract, into the procurement. And there are certain players who may have been involved in the procurement, but it will also call upon Vertical to have to explain, because you see in the United States they have very serious legislation with respect to the bribery of officials, foreign officials, and with respect to how you enter into contracts with foreign countries. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in particular. So it is my intention, on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, to write to the Department of Justice in the United States, asking that they immediately commence an investigation into the procurement of this particular asset on the terms that it was procured. And part of the investigation should be into Vertical and how they managed to get this asset leased by Trinidad and Tobago for this exorbitant amount of money, and more so without our right to terminate the contract. I've heard, you all would have heard what our Attorney General has said over the last few days in looking at the contract in particular. The Ministry of National Security, and in particular the minister who signed it at the time, was covered by the then Attorney General giving the legal advice. So there are questions asked to be answered there. My understanding is there were also independent lawyers involved in the process. But in particular, who is it that negotiated the terms of this contract on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and more so Vertical, who now are intent on extracting more than their pound of flesh, because they've already been paid significant millions and millions and millions of US dollars for this asset, but now intent on pursuing us further. So we shall be writing to the Department of Justice to ask that an investigation be done into the procurement of this particular lease arrangement, and let's see where the chips fall thereafter. So that is all that we have to say at this time with respect to these helicopters. I did not comment up to this point because I did not think it prudent. We had already outlined previously what had happened with previous leasing of helicopters, the unnecessary leasing of helicopters. And with this one in particular, I always had concerns about the way that the lease arrangement was procured. And now we will be asking that the Department of Justice in the United States get involved and conduct a full investigation. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon, Minister James Lovin with the Newsday. With regards to the writing to the FBI, is there a statute of limitations on this offense or possible offense?
It's not to the FBI, it's the Department of Justice. The FBI falls under the Department of Justice, so we'll be writing. I had actually in the past met with their specific departments in the Department of Justice. So on one of my trips to Washington, I'd actually met with the particular department that deals with these types of allegations with foreign corrupt practices, so we'll be writing to them in particular. I don't suspect that there is any statute of limitations, because when these things are discovered in criminal law, there is no statute of limitations for this type of incident. But I am not an expert in American law. But certainly our lawyers, when I discussed it with them, didn't red flag a limitation period problem.
And your trip to Washington, did this topic come up at the time?
That was on other non-related issues.
And when were you made aware of all these red flags in this contract?
I took a look at this within the last few months. If I remember correctly, it would have been, just give me 1 second, I might note it here. Okay, on November 13th is when I raised it with the lawyers.
That's our local lawyers?
No, the international lawyers.
Okay. Two other questions on this topic and then some other topics, if you don't mind straying from the point just a little bit. Right. You made mention of an advisor being sought with regards to the breaking of the contract. Who is the advisor, or who's the attorney that you spoke with locally?
You mean when I said that the SSA had sought advice? The SSA had sought the advice of the Office of the Attorney General.
And I'm assuming that he outsourced this?
No, I wouldn't assume that.
And my final question on this topic was, 1 second, the lease period, the first helicopter that you made mention of, what was the lease period for that?
That's the one that never made it here, the one in Delaware.
Yeah.
As is, where is, that was a 3-year lease.
And the second one is a 5-year lease?
The second one is a 5-year lease.
Those are my questions for the topic. I want to move on to something else. So I want to make sure. I'm moving on to another topic with regards to the registration of Venezuelan nationals. What is happening with that?
Okay, as you all would have heard the Honorable Prime Minister outline on one of our previous occasions when he had a press conference towards the end of 2020, I am going to Cabinet for the approval to commence a follow-up registration process. It's not going to be along the lines of the initial registration process in 2019. We are, as a Cabinet, going to grant a further 6-month extension to those Venezuelans who were registered under the Venezuelan migrant registration process in 2019 and who have not been taken off of the registration. They're going to be given the opportunity to come back in, to renew their details, to give us further information as to themselves. As we had always said we would do, it gives us an opportunity to interface, to make sure we have accurate information, and then they'll be given a further 6 months.
Just for clarity's sake, the registration of the 16,523, this is strictly adults or adults and children?
As I'd said at the time, that was a registration from babies go all the way up to adults. So you had babies, you had children, you had young adults, you had teenagers and adults, everyone.
Moving on to exemptions and COVID. How many exemptions, if you can recall, if you have the data close by, were granted for non-nationals?
No, I don't have that information. I came here to deal with helicopters.
And if you have the information, how many exemptions were granted for returning nationals to visit?
I don't have that information today.
Good afternoon, Minister. Peter Christopher from Guardian Media. I would like to continue on the topic of exemptions. I know you say you don't have much information on you, but were additional exemptions given for returning nationals for the holiday period? And could you give an estimate, if possible, as to how many were?
I mean, the last time I met with you all, I had the figures up to the 23rd of December. All right? We've granted a lot more exemptions. We've had a number of flights come in since the 23rd of December. In fact, we have a flight coming in today. Today's the 6th from Barbados. We had one come in last night from New York. I think the one last night from New York had, I know it had over 100 people. I'm trying to remember if it was they gave the statistics earlier today. 130 people came in on that. Some would have fallen off, but there have been a lot more exemptions granted during that period of time. I do have the exact figure. I'll be able to provide that at the next update.
Also on that note, when last I spoke with you at the post-cabinet press briefing, you stated that there was an adjustment with regards to flights from Barbados included, with regard to the possibility that UK nationals or people residing in the UK might come into Trinidad.
Okay.
Has there been any further adjustment with regard to that?
There's been no further adjustment. The adjustment you're referring to is when the new variant of COVID is faster, seemingly faster, spreadable variant of COVID that was picked up in the United Kingdom, first of all, came to our attention. We immediately took a decision that persons returning from the United Kingdom would have to, in addition to providing negative PCR test 72 hours before arrival in Trinidad and Tobago, your quarantine on arrival would now be increased to 14 days as opposed to the 7 days. So that was kicked in. On this flight here today, they would have some persons who would be returning from the United Kingdom and would fall into that category. There have been discussions that have been ongoing between National Security and the Ministry of Health. We'll meet with the Prime Minister very shortly to give further recommendations, and we'll presumably announce further decisions later on, probably this weekend.
Permit me two further questions. You made mention of the November date when you were made aware of the red flags, and you spoke with the DOJ around that time.
No, I said I spoke with the foreign attorneys around that time. I intend to write to the DOJ. I haven't spoken to the DOJ about this as yet.
Now, question is, why now bring it to the attention of the country after the opposition sort of brought it to light first?
Well, you have to understand that everything that's done in national security, in particular with dealing with corruption, is all about timing. I mean, I would not bring a lot of matters that are being investigated to the attention of the public because you don't want to jeopardize the successful outcome of investigations, etc. So it is not that. So I guess, yes, it was provoked because now you've said, well, what are we doing? So now I've come forward to say, well, this is the course of action that we're taking. I'd put out a warning and saying, listen, don't go barking up trees and don't go screaming, because you mightn't like the response you get.
No, I know you just said investigation. I'm assuming initial investigation when you first found out and you spoke with the lawyers and whatnot. Between then and now, any links, any relationship between some of the advisors at the NOC then with either, what was the name of the company?
Vertical.
Milestone or
Milestone and
Vertical.
Yeah, and that will have to be conducted I hope, by the Department of Justice, who will have the type of resources, etc. Because, of course, Vertical and Milestone are a company that don't reside here in Trinidad and Tobago.
But so far, no on the face.
I don't want to say anything to jeopardize anything at this stage.
And from your estimate, what is the, if any at all, penalty that locals who might be involved in this face?
Again, I am not an expert at all in American law, but I mean, I've observed for many years how their justice system works, and I will leave that with them.
And my final question is, given all that's been happening with the Piarco inquiry and the involvement of allegations of corruption and the U.S. government, that is still before the courts, do you foresee that we would get swift justice in this?
Again, on the corruption associated with the Piarco contract, which is what, a couple decades old, understand in the United States they have already done their investigations, they've had trials, people have served their sentences, etc. So I am going to the United States to ask them to conduct an investigation. It's not going to be dependent on investigations conducted here in Trinidad and Tobago or judicial system here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Hi, Minister. Karen Koza, Philip, TTT News. Just to clarify, you said you intend to write them. Do you have a time frame of when you will do this?
That letter will be sent off to them before the end of the week. Okay? All right, thank you all very, very much, and stay safe out there. Take care.
That was a media conference by National Security Minister Stuart Young to update on security matters of national interest. You can tune in to TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM, Sweet 100.1 FM, Next 99.1 FM, and on Facebook at TTT Live Online for all your updates. I'm DK Rostar.